Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on one of the most famous texts of antiquity, the Gospel of Luke. But, we're not just going to read this as a standard religious text. Nope, we're going to tear it down to the studs and look at it as a brilliantly structured piece of ancient literature. A narrative literally obsessed with a radical reversal of fortunes. It's packed with history, intense social dynamics, and honestly, it's just absolutely fascinating to unpack when you look closely at how the author actually designed the whole thing.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for distilling 22 chapters of some pretty complex material. We'll start with an orderly account, look at the great reversal, see what it means to reach the marginalized, dig into the parables of the lost, weigh the cost of discipleship, and finally, wrap up with the showdown in Jerusalem.
Section 1. An orderly account. The author's thesis.
So, to truly understand the mechanics of any ancient text, we gotta look right at the opening lines to catch the author's explicit goal. Notice this claim to methodology right at the top. The author literally writes that they have carefully investigated everything from the beginning based on eyewitness accounts in order to write an orderly account. This isn't presented as some vague, hazy myth. The narrator is explicitly framing this text as a structured, highly logical compilation of events for a very specific recipient.
And who exactly is that recipient? Well, it's Theophilus. The name translates from Greek to lover of God or friend of God. Defining this name gives us a fantastic baseline for our explainer today, because it helps us understand the target audience. Now, whether Theophilus was an actual Roman official or just a broader symbolic title for, any reader seeking to understand this new movement, the text is clearly designed to provide certainty through structure.
Section 2. The Great Reversal, a narrative theme.
This establishes the core thematic thesis of the entire text, the Great Reversal. And this brilliantly illustrates how the narrative repeatedly contrasts elevating the marginalized with bringing down the powerful. Take a look at the contrast. Early on in chapter 1, Mary's song famously declares that God has brought down rulers from their thrones, but has lifted up the humble, sending the rich away empty. And then, fast-forwarding down the line to chapter 6, Jesus delivers the Beatitudes. He explicitly states, "Blessed are you who are poor," while issuing a pretty stark warning, "Woe to you who are rich." It's a striking, super consistent motif of societal inversion, and it drives the entire plot forward.
Section 3. Reaching the marginalized. Action over expectation.
So this is essentially Acts 2 of our narrative arc. It shows how the text portrays Jesus enacting this reversal not just with words but through very specific physical, social actions all across the Galilee region. The text perfectly captures the stark contrast between ancient societal expectations and the protagonist's genuinely shocking actions. Where society expected people to rigorously avoid lepers due to ritual impurity, Jesus explicitly reaches out, touches, and heals a leper in chapter 5. Where religious norms demanded shunning tax collectors, who were basically seen as corrupt traitors extracting money for Rome, Jesus actively calls Levi to follow him and later happily dines with Zacchaeus. I mean, that was a truly scandalous move for a religious teacher back then. And while the elite expected a holy figure to reject sinners, chapter 7 shows Jesus allowing a woman with a sinful reputation to publicly wash his feet with her tears at a Pharisee's dinner table. The text is objectively showing a protagonist who is actively shattering the social boundaries of his era.
Section 4. Parables of the Lost. Radical storytelling.
As this physical journey progresses, the text utilizes these fascinating micro-narratives, parables, to teach the mechanics of this new, inverted social order, and it focuses heavily on radical storytelling about the lost. The whole thing kicks off with this single pivotal question posed by an expert in the law: and who is my neighbor? The text actually notes that the lawyer asked this to justify himself. He's essentially looking for a legal loophole, right? The absolute minimum requirement for his religious duty. I guess some things never really change. But this highly specific technical question triggers what is arguably one of the most famous parables in all of world literature.
Let's walk through the narrative beats of the Good Samaritan. First, a priest sees a half-dead, beaten man on the road to Jericho and just passes by on the other side. Second, a Levite, another highly respected religious figure, does the exact same thing. But then, third, a Samaritan takes pity, bandages the man's wounds with oil and wine, and literally pays an innkeeper for his ongoing care. What is absolutely crucial to grasp here is the subversive literary brilliance of this choice. In this historical context, Samaritans and Jews utterly despised each other. So by making the expected outgroup member the ultimate moral hero of the story, the narrative fundamentally redefines societal boundaries. It's a real game changer.
This intense theme of valuing the lost over the established continues right into chapter 15. The text focuses heavily on things that are lost and then found. It explicitly states that a shepherd will leave 99 sheep out in the open country just to relentlessly go after the single lost one. The author boldly claims there is more rejoicing in heaven over one single sinner who repents than over the 99 righteous persons who don't need to repent. The inversion of what is considered valuable here is absolute.
Section 5. The cost of discipleship. High stakes.
Now, the tone of the narrative takes a really sharp turn here. It's not all just healing and beautiful storytelling anymore. The text lays out some incredibly stark requirements in chapter 14 for those choosing to follow. To be a disciple, Jesus states one must hate their father, mother, wife, children, and even their own life. He's using intense hyperbole here to demand absolute loyalty above fundamental family ties. They must carry their cross daily, and they must give up everything they have. So the crucial point is that this movement demands a severe, uncompromising commitment. The narrator is making it perfectly clear that this path is dangerous, setting a very heavy stage as the journey continues.
Section 6. Showdown in Jerusalem. The breaking point.
And this brings us to Act 4 of the text. The physical progression has finally reached the epicenter of religious and Roman political power, and an explosive clash is, well, it's inevitable. You can clearly see how the structure of the book maps out a physical timeline tracking this rising conflict. It starts with a widespread ministry up in rural Galilee, then a long, tense journey through regions like Samaria. Next, the dramatic arrival at the Mount of Olives where crowds are literally praising him as a king. And finally, the climax, entering the capital city and directly clearing out the temple in Jerusalem. This moment in the temple is just electric. Jesus physically drives out the sellers, declaring, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." This direct physical challenge to the religious authorities, and specifically their economic system, is the absolute breaking point. The text notes that from this exact day on, the chief priests and leaders actively try to kill him. What follows in the text is some seriously intense intellectual sparring. On one hand, the religious elite demand to know by what authority he is acting. They're trying to trap him with these duplicitous questions about paying taxes to Caesar and throwing complex theological puzzles at him about the resurrection. But on the other hand, Jesus counters seamlessly. He tells parables specifically targeted against them and delivers these striking apocalyptic warnings, predicting the total destruction of the temple stones themselves. It is a complete and very public destabilization of their established order.
And that brings us right to the edge of the material we've analyzed today. Chapter 22 opens with Satan entering Judas, a member of the Inner 12 who secretly agrees to betray Jesus for money right as the massive Passover festival is approaching. It leaves us with a profound narrative question. As this deadly plot is hatched in the shadows, what happens when this great reversal finally collides with immovable Roman and religious power? It's a brilliant cliffhanger, and it definitely leaves you eager to read the rest of the text. I really hope this structured look at the Gospel of Luke gave you some fresh insights. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.